Good afternoon. My name is Barbara Velasquez. Thank you for joining Metropolitan Community College for the second in a series of our Diversity Matters film series. This afternoon, we're going to watch a documentary and then share in a discussion. The documentary will last about 30 minutes, and then we are glad and pleased to have Tulani Grundy Meadows, JD, one of Metro's exemplary faculty in the area of political science and human relations, share in discussion with us about this important topic. Throughout the presentation, your microphones and chat with other audience members are turned off, but you can always contact the host. During the viewing, write down your questions and thoughts. Send these at any time to moderator Barbara Velasquez. I will share your questions with our discussion leader as the film ends. Also, we will put a link in the chat for an online evaluation. We so much appreciate your feedback that helps us for the future. Selling lies. In 2016, an army of teenagers in Macedonia discovered a wildly lucrative game of posting false political clickbait news articles on Facebook for profit. By creating websites leading up to the presidential election that published sensationalized and misleading news stories about American politics, they generated a massive income and influenced the election. Selling Lies offers a rare glimpse inside the secret network behind these websites, including one notorious ringleader whose social media reach had vast implication on American readers, and explores how disinformation campaigns are continuing to strongly impact the US today and into the future. Please sit back and enjoy Selling Lies.
And we should, frankly, feel pretty incensed about what happened and committed to preserving the integrity of our democratic systems. The complex nature of this requires that we all do our part. And we know that Facebook and other social media engines have done a lot of work and continue to do work to right things. Kids in Macedonia aren't making money off of this anymore, and that's progress. And now it's on us to do our part. Are there any questions, thoughts, observations? I'd like to hear what you all thought.
Everybody, we'll get started here. Send your questions to moderator Barbara Velasquez. Tulani, if you come to a point where you'd like to open mics, just let us know. But fake news has been such a big phrase, I guess, for such a long time. I really appreciated the documentary because it showed us how. It showed us why. It showed us that perspective from outside of the US. And Tulani, you know that I am open and interested in, fascinated by our entire world and accepting of all human beings. But I felt a lot of anger while I watched this. I wondered what the rest of our audience felt. But I love the way that you commented that this is more responsibility of the American electorate than Macedonian teenagers. I do have concerns about that, however, because I don't necessarily see our electorate becoming more educated. And what are your thoughts on how we really can get people, besides this documentary, more educated?
Yeah, that's a great question. one of the experiences that has proved super insightful as an instructor at Metro is that, I've had the opportunity over the years to take students abroad with Barb's program to kind of study geopolitics and kind of cultural perspectives on this whole notion of democracy and what political engagement looks like in other places. And one of the observations that we have consistently made, whether it be in West Africa or Jamaica or Ireland, is that people take their political responsibility like really seriously in a lot of these places. And they see information and being informed as sort of a sacred sort of thing. And so democracy of voting is something that really relies on that sense of responsibility for it to be done effectively. And it's something for our students who come from our culture and history and context really find fascinating, because we know that many Americans simply don't have that same relationship with politics. In terms of our level of engagement, we like to say we're engaged, but when it comes to actual real information and being informed, that's not always the case. In many ways, this is kind of like the backlash to democracy, right? We all have the right to vote, and that's a great thing. But there is not that sense of responsibility that we hold in terms of being informed when it comes to exercising that democratic right.
I appreciate that. I'm looking at the Selling Lies website, and they suggest using online tools to protect yourself from misinformation. And I suspect that many of our audience members are more familiar with these than I am. But we have SNOPES, POYNTER, factcheck.org, POLITIFACT, PolitiFact, and the News Literacy Project. Do you believe your students use those? Are they learning to use those?
I sure hope so. I think we're getting better. I think we do, as a nation, have a heightened awareness about these matters. That's not to say that we can't fall prey to fake news. It absolutely does happen. And we know that this is something that has become incredibly sophisticated. So the ability to discern whether something is real or false can be really difficult at times. And while there are great efforts to kind of mitigate the damage that fake news has done, I kind of think of it like a wildfire. Fake news is something that very quickly and very easily spreads, but it's much harder to control it. So I do believe it is our responsibility to be very mindful and responsible about, in terms of the sources that we consult, to exercise our due diligence to the best of our ability to make sure that the information that we are consuming is real. And there are some red flags. I think some of the things that we picked up in terms of the strategies that were invoked by the teenagers of Macedonia, outrageous headlines. I always tell my students, if it sounds really outrageous to you, like jaw-dropping outrageous, and you just gotta click to see what it is, chances are it's not real, okay? Most real news is not salacious in that manner. So I think there are things that we can do to do better with this, but it's not easy.
Yeah. I find myself wondering, I know you're not a journalist, but I find myself wondering about the future of journalism.
Yeah.
Where they say that all the standard ways of journalism are kind of going to the wayside. I just wonder if journalists can band together, protect their profession, and find ways to not only rejuvenate their industry in a way that people want to see it, but also help to combat this.
Yeah,
Um,
the free press has always served it's been a sacred part of our democracy. In many ways, the free press is the fourth branch of government in terms of its function as a means of political oversight. But for the press, we wouldn't know a whole lot of things. I mean, you don't have to look very far back in history. Almost every impeachment situation that has come about, abuse of power, or whatever it may be, we know about it because of the press and investigative journalism. So I think that, an important takeaway from this is that like good journalism still lives. And I know we kind of have this, a lot of my students want to make this assumption that all journalism is bad, it's all fake, and that's simply not the case. We rely on solid journalism to be informed, to know what's happening in terms of the mechanics of government, in the Oval Office. So it's still very much a sacred trust.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you all see how powerful, wonderful it would be to be in one of Miss Tulani's classrooms? Check her out. She's a great teacher. So, and I want to say, I'm going back to something that you mentioned about the exposure you and your students had when you traveled abroad. I feel like this documentary speaks even more to the need for international and intercultural exposure. When the gentleman spoke to the fact that these teenagers don't understand English very well, they don't really understand US politics, they don't know what's going on in the US, they're just looking, they picked out words and they found out the words that would buy them money. And those two that he mentioned were Trump and anti-Hillary. So with more exposure, Macedonians would understand maybe some thoughts that Americans traveling to Macedonia and living in Macedonia and studying in Macedonia feel. And the Americans would also be learning about that Macedonian perspective and maybe see the challenges that they're facing financially and how, et cetera, et cetera. So I do think that this speaks to this need for people to get to know each other better.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. There's so much value on so many levels, in terms of stepping outside of our own comfort zones, and just learning how other people live and their perspective, how politics and government work in different places. Who's to know at the end of the day what kind of difference that makes? But I think that there is great value, to that exercise, to that practice. I think more than anything, the economic desperation that these teens faced in Macedonia was ultimately what drove them to engage in whatever activity that would help them feed their families. And sadly, I think that's a reality for many people of many nations, something that is unfamiliar to some of us as Americans, not all of us, but in many nations, sadly, that is the norm. So that will make you do things that seem crazy, that seem outrageous, without question.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So questions are starting to roll in. If the business model for local is broken, should we find other revenue streams like taxing social media companies to fund quality local journalism?
There's something to that. Yeah, I mean, I think Facebook, other social media engines shoulder a lot of this, right? I mean, who's to say that if Facebook ever saw anything like this coming? What happened in 2020 was kind of unprecedented for our world. But now that we know, and now that we have the ability to do better, what responsibility do we all bear in terms of making this a just, more fair system?
Yeah. I want to say that another thing that stuck out to me was, and this is a learning of the whys, because it's always helpful to understand why. When it was mentioned that the mainstream media in Macedonia was such a fake news operation itself, that the teenagers had grown up with that, and therefore they probably felt like many professionals in what they were doing.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
didn't have the titles, but they were doing what they had learned all their lives. I thought that was fascinating and scary.
Pretty scary. I mean, we saw, profile students who literally like dropped out of school. This became an economic machine that, whatever you were learning in, your high school English class or math class could not compete with this opportunity. So, yeah.
Wow. Another audience member says, I was mad too. I don't have a question, just a comment. I wrote my first web page in 1998. So people creating fake sites have always been on my radar. I don't understand people who believe everything they see online. It makes no sense to me.
Yeah. I hear you.
Well, let me see if I have any more notes here. Audience members, if you have a final thought, throw it out there. I think part of my anger too was seeing the cars and the clothing and the beauty, the excess spending, it seemed, of the people who were doing all this, right?
Yeah.
And to walk around so proudly saying.
Yeah.
So Tulani, would you like to give us any final comments? Because I think our questions are ending here.
Yeah, well, I know, again, thank you, Barb, and everyone for joining today. This is an incredibly important piece, and I think for many of us, really enlightening. So I would encourage you, again, to kind of view this kind of thing as a call to action and sense of your own sense of personal responsibility, how we approach news, how we approach information, and to share it. I think, the more people who know about this reality, the better positioned we are to protect our democracy.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So very much. It's been such a pleasure to have you with us, Tulani, and all of our audience members. I know, Tulani, that you enrich the lives of Metropolitan Community College students daily in your coursework, but today you helped us to really see the impact of selling lies, and even did so when I quickly asked you to be ready earlier than we expected. So that is so appreciated.
Happy to be here.
Audience members, take this information to heart, register to vote, check out your resources, and help to share true messages about our government and the impact on our communities. I'd like to share that if you would like to see this video again, it is available through Metropolitan Community College libraries to our students or personnel. They have what they call a virtual streaming license, a perpetual streaming license. So you just need to contact the libraries and they can help you find access to lives. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.